Next month, Sonic and Friends will be crossing over with the DC Universe. Across both Fleetway and Archie's runs with the Blue Blur, Sonic comics have had a very clear reverence for superhero comics. Whether that just be visual references to heroes or paying tribute to specific creators. And this reverence might be returned? Unclear. Despite this, the last time the Sonic comics had a proper crossover with superheroes was way back in 1998's Sonic Super Special number 7, which saw Sonic and Friends cross paths with characters from the Image comics, like Spawn, who dips from the crossover almost immediately, Savage Dragon, who's honestly met everybody at this point, and the Max, from my favorite comic series of all time. I'll talk about this eventually. But yeah, Sonic's been overdue to cross paths with superheroes again for quite some time, with this new crossover being written by longtime Sonic writer Ian Flynn. Now, when this was first announced, I did see a handful of people asking why there wasn't a DC writer involved in this project. But the funny thing is, in between Archie Sonic's last issue and IDW's first, Ian actually did work on a few DC projects. The first one we never saw. It was a short story for the series Earth 2 Society, which of course was a series focused on an alternate Earth and its heroes. I'd go into the specific differences, but it's a lot. I would imagine this one-shot story was probably intended for the annual, and the story might have been cut to meet a specific page length. Obviously though, someone at DC must have liked his work, because they brought him in to work on the mobile game DC Unchained, developed by 433 Creative Lab. In fact, if you don't count comics he wrote that were released as bonuses with games, comics that were literally on the game cartridge, or comics released as marketing material for the games, this is the first video game he wrote for. He specifically lists his duties as localizing the game's Korean to English script, as the game was developed in South Korea, rewriting all the dialogue to be more clear and to be closer to how English-speaking audiences expect these characters to act. He also wrote the script for the comic book-styled cutscenes. However, his own description of his work I think underplays the fact that the game's announcement trailer gave him, along with artist Paolo Pantalena, top billing. Like a lot of mobile games of this style, it's no longer available for download, but there's plenty of footage of it out there. My reaction when I first saw it was that it looked sort of like a mobile version of Marvel Ultimate Alliance, but then I saw someone compare it to Marvel Future Fight, which I've never played, and yeah, these are the same game. But because of this game, Ian's actually written for a solid chunk of the DC universe, though he was probably working within the constraints of an existing narrative. So between that and the fact that I'm mainly watching footage of people playing the game rather than experiencing it for myself, it's sort of hard to judge it, but I think some of the dialogue is fun. And there's some bits that I'm sure if they were in a comic rather than a mobile game would be shared around a lot. But with one being an unpublished story and the other being a video game you can't really officially get your hands on anymore, there's still one collaboration between DC and Ian Flynn you can still read in preparation for the Sonic crossover, as he contributed to 2018's Superman special. The Superman special is actually composed of 3 stories, all by different teams. The first, titled For Those Who Serve, is about Clark and John rescuing Captain Storm from an island of dinosaurs. King Kong's there, kinda. Giant gorilla living with dinosaurs, it's close enough for me. The second story, titled Strays and Strangers, uses both a kaiju attack and a collapsing building to highlight Clark's values. The third story is titled Split Decision, and this is the one Ian wrote. The main focus of this story isn't actually Superman, but the reformed villain Atomic Skull. And because he isn't necessarily a main Superman antagonist, I'll give a brief rundown of his story so far. This continuity's version of the character begins in the 2012 Action Comics Annual, where scientist Albert Michaels manages to survive an accident aboard a Star Lab submarine, only to be completely doused in radiation. As he finds himself trapped on a deserted island, his body slowly begins changing into the macabre image of the Atomic Skull. He's a villain for a bit, which lands him as an inmate on Stryker's Island, an extremely abusive prison run by LexCorp. He manages to escape during a large-scale power outage and reveals the corruption to our heroes. Also, working with Superwoman, he helps save Metropolis, putting him on a path to redemption. And this eventually sees him recruited for the Metropolis Special Crimes Unit, doing his best as a hero, though still harboring a grudge against Superman for putting him in Strikers in the first place. I'm glossing over a lot of different events and nuances, but this is what you really need to know for this story. Our story begins with Atomic Skull's morning routine and preparing for a sting to bring one of the other Strikers escapees back into custody. And I want to say that I adore the art here. It's done by Kari Andrews, and I really like the way he draws Atomic Skull. He's able to paint a lot of emotion on a face that's just a skull. The MSCU is working to bring in a villain known as Shockwave, who, based on his name, I'm sure you can guess the powers of. And when Skull comes back from reconnaissance to inform the rest of his unit that he's found the building their target is hiding in, he finds that Superman is there as well, and his captain informs him that he's just there in a support capacity. After Skull informs them of Shockwave's position, Superman questions why he just wouldn't leave town. Skull responds that maybe he didn't want to get dragged off to Strikers to be tortured again, before moving into position. Superman asks the captain if he's really just there for Shockwave, to which she reveals that while Skull has been excellent on the team, she worries about him going back to his old ways. Superman responds that he's a believer in giving everyone another chance. Meanwhile, Skull begins to stew about his previous interactions with Superman, and even is clearly resentful that his own powers are very much a burden, though he's broken out of this trance when Superman says he's ready to apprehend Shockwave whenever, even calling Skull by his real name, though the reformed villain insists to be called by his moniker. When they enter the building, Skull attempts to take him peacefully, only for Shockwave to immediately call him a sellout and blast the two of them. Somehow, it not only takes down Skull, but Superman as well, completely disorienting the two of them, with Kal-El not even being able to use his powers. Shockwave reveals his plan, that as everything has a unique molecular vibration, if you neutralize it, whatever it is will fall apart, and that he's going to shatter the Man of Steel. However, as time passes, Skull realizes that the vibrations are no longer affecting him, his powers converting it. After he stands up, Shockwave urges him to help kill Superman, causing him to flash back to not only the abuse he suffered at the hands of prison guards, but to his captain giving him his second chance. I adore this panel, by the way. Doing the flashback in his flames is really cool looking. In the end, Atomic Skull decides to save Superman. Shockwave immediately attacks him, but that gives Superman a chance to regain his composure and take down the villain. Afterwards, Clark thanks Skull for his help, and it looks like for a moment he takes it to heart, but he quickly turns around and says not to patronize him, and that all his optimism is really lies, and that Shockwave is only the way he is because of people like Superman. Supes, in his normal hopeful attitude, responds that even if the two of them will never be on good terms, he hopes that Skull continues on his current path, because who knows what the future holds. As the hero flies away with the unconscious Shockwave, Skull looks at his hand, still coursing with the energy from the encounter, repeating, "Who knows?" I really like this story. In fact, while this wasn't the first time I had seen Atomic Skull, this is the first story about Atomic Skull I'd read, and it inspired me to not only go back and read his other appearances to see what led him to this point, but also is really the inspiration for this whole video, as I enjoyed it that much, but I'd never seen anyone really highlight this story. As I'm sure you can tell by some of my other videos, I'm a big fan of the villain on the path of redemption style of story, especially if they look like a big monster. And I think this covers that idea very well. While he clearly wants to help, he's still struggling with some personal aspects. And it's not in the way where he's keeping it hidden so you expect he's gonna turn on everyone. No, he's very upfront about the problems he's having. So the final panel of the story is full of uncertainty, whether he'll keep on the current path or if he'll revert to villainy. The actual situation echoes the final lines of the story. Who knows? It's very clear his issue with Superman is that he thinks he's a disingenuous liar, because he can't imagine anyone who caused him that amount of pain, even indirectly, could be as good as Superman acts. I also like that Atomic Skull being the one to save the day directly plays off his initial expectation of being shown up by Superman. I love the way Superman is written here. Clark's always going to be seen as the big blue Boy Scout, but having a story where he's vindicated in his position of giving everyone another chance, and also that he doesn't mind if Skull hates him, cause what matters is Skull being the best version of himself he can be. It's peak Superman as a symbol of hope. Even Shockwave I think is handled pretty well. This is the first time I'd heard of him, and honestly from the number of his total appearances, seems like a certified D-lister. But this makes him look like a credible threat, and it makes sense too. Kal-El is invulnerable to a lot, but I can believe that, at minimum, attacking him on a subatomic level could throw him off his game. So I'm kinda surprised they haven't done anything with Shockwave recently. This special dropped 3 months after IDW Sonic #1, so it's understandable why Ian didn't write any more DC stuff after this. But I imagine that if that series had never happened, DC would have absolutely given him more opportunities to write stories for their universe. Overall, I think 2018's Superman special is great. In addition to the story Ian wrote, it's got 2 other really good stories as well. In a lot of cases, I do think specials and annuals can be good places to sort of vibe check a series as a new reader. I've definitely started some friends with the 2022 Sonic annual, and they really enjoyed it. So if any Sonic fans want to peek in on the DC universe ahead of the crossover, and get a bit of a feel for how Ian will handle it, check this one out. Thank you all so much for watching. I definitely wanted to get this out ahead of the DCX Sonic crossover, so I hope you all enjoyed. I want to thank all my patrons, and give a special shout out to my $5 patrons, Ned Rex, Nate DM990, Diddly Do, and Queer Kaiju. See y'all in the next video.